Hey guys, thank you for joining. Did you ever wonder what's at the core of our reality and where we come from? Did you ever think that examining the differences between stones, trees, and animals would give the solution to that question? Well, this video is built in 3 stages. First, we'll discuss the differences between the 4 categories: the inanimate, the growing, the living, and the speaking. The difference between stones and plants is that stones have absolutely no life, but plants do show some life with their growth. Now, although this may seem very obvious at first, it will give us perspective on the cosmic evolution of spiritual dimensions, which will be part 2. But still, both the plants and the inanimate, like stones and water, have something in common. That is that their main definition is that of body and physicality. In part 3, we'll discover a bit of an issue with this understanding, but we'll fill the gaps by investigating our very own psyche. Beings like animals, for example, are very different. They're living beings which move around and go about in their day-to-day lives. In this sense, they're more similar to humans than they are to plants. Animals can move around and they're driven by their power of will. Plants are just stuck in their place. They can't move around. They grow exactly in the same spot where they were born. In other words, their life is simply coming to give life to the physicality of them. And that's why they're stuck in their place, because the definition of physicality is something that takes space. So it's almost like the life is coming and giving life to their space. So they're kind of like stuck there. Animals don't have this. It's more like their body is somewhat serving their life. They have interests. Their interests represent their life source, so to speak. And then they run around and about doing what their interests are. Now, it's true that in that sense, they're very different than humans, because humans seek things which are beyond them and higher than them, and animals are stuck to their instincts, and pretty much their only desires and interests are to feed their bodies and take care of their body temptations. The human represents spirituality and soul most out of all of them, since the human body is there to serve the will of the soul. It's true that many of us have temptations and desires which we try to fulfill most of the time, but in reality, our human bodies can be a vessel to fulfill the infinite will and desire of the soul. Desires like seeking higher and understanding purity and doing favors for people in a sincere way. These are things animals don't really do. These 4 stages are perfect for understanding and explaining the spiritual realms which we come from. As we go into part 2, where we're going to talk about the cosmic realms, just wanted to point out that there are 4 cosmic realms, each one greater and more refined than the other. We are going to start describing them here in part 2, but we'll only really understand them in part 3. If our relationship to spirituality comes to us from our soul, then in the general cosmos of worlds and dimensions, the highest world, the highest and greatest and most refined dimension would be resembled, so to speak, by that of our experience as humans. In other words, just as our body and physicality serves the spirituality of the soul, at least we're able to if we're interested in it, so too this spiritual and infinite realm has, so to speak, a definition, but that definition is all about serving the purpose and the infinity within it. Therefore, it's completely beyond and completely spiritual and completely unified and one with God. The next dimension, however, would be corresponded to more of like the animal, the way we see it in this world. What am I referring to? The animal, although it has a life source, and the body serves that life source by fulfilling its will. That will is limited, though, to body temptations and can't go and do actual spiritual things. So that's a very big and far leap from the ultimate spirituality that there is in the higher world. So in this next world, although there is spirituality and physicality within it, and the physicality of it even, so to speak, serves the purpose of the spirituality is on a lower level and doesn't have full control over the physicality. These 2 spiritual and infinite worlds which we're talking about are called Atzilut and Beriya. Atzilut being the higher one, Beriya being the lower one. The next world, called Yetzira, the world of formation. The world of formation is going to be more like plants. In other words, The life which is in the world of formation is completely concealed and within the confinement of the body and the physicality within it. Now, it's not fully physical just yet. In other words, it is still a spiritual world, and it's going to be kind of like the tree. The tree has life within it. So in other words, there's life expressed. Now, since that life is expressed and that life is infinite and godly, what that means is you can't really see the physicality within it. And then finally, the last realm, the last world is going to be Asiya, and that's going to be the world of the physical, where we don't see any godliness. Everything is completely hidden, so we only see what we have. But there's a bit of an issue with the way we've just explained these four categories and their comparisons to the infinite and spiritual world till we reach this physical world of ours. Okay, now just before we get into part 3 discussing the four worlds, I did want to point out that 89% of viewers are already gone by now. So if you're still here, that means you have quite an interest, and I would suggest you subscribe and like and join us for the other things that we have to talk about on this channel. Okay, now let's get into part 3. And what's the issue? That these four categories that we experience in our world are completely separate things. In other words, stones and water are things for themselves, and then we have plants and trees, which are things for themselves, and then we have animals and humans, were all things for themselves. The spiritual worlds are not things for themselves. In other words, it's not like we have our world and then we have more spiritual world and a more spiritual world and a more spiritual world. It's not exactly like that. They're all one within the other. In other words, we have this physical world, and beneath it, so to speak, within it, there's a layer of spirituality and godliness which we cannot see. And within that, there's another layer of spirituality and godliness which we also cannot see, but is even more refined and holy than the level which is closer to us. And then within it, deep down, there's a layer of spirituality which is so infinite and unified with God that within it, these tables and everything that we see around us are not even going to be recognized. It's just all going to be one singularity and unified within God. But even this, we have a comparison and a way to understand it from our very own experience here in this world within us as humans alone. You see, within us as humans alone, we have these categories of inanimate and growing parts of us, and then we have that animal part of us, and then we have that human part of us. The inanimate are the atoms and carbons which we're made of as human beings. But then those come together and become part of something which can grow. This is expressed by the fact that we grow as humans. And then there's that part of us which is like an animal, when we as humans go and look for our body desires and try to fulfill our temptations. But then finally there's that part of us that comes to the study chamber and wants to seek and understand something which is beyond us and connect to something higher and infinite. Let's break this down by examining our human psyche. Our human psyche is also broken down into 4 general categories. There's our power of intellect, the power to understand, the ability to break something down and understand it on a deeper level. Now, although when we were speaking about the 4 categories before, we said that humans are special because humans have the power to understand abstract things and things which are beyond them, unlike animals which are controlled by their instincts. But in our human psyche, when speaking about our intellect really is a concealment of the infinity coming from the soul. You see, the soul's desire is infinite and pure. The way we grasp things in our minds and our understandings are in limited boxes. This requires the soul to come into our bodies and limit itself into the way we understand things. That's not as much of a limitation as when the soul needs to bring its desire from our intellect, from the way we understand things, into our feelings, into our human desires and temptations as humans which want to do things like eating and fulfilling our own desires. And even these human desires of ours are not as much of a limitation and a place where the soul needs to conceal itself as much as our physical action. When we go and do things in this physical world, the soul needs to completely conceal itself and is not at all felt. Or another example for this would be when we speak and we try to bring our feelings or whatever we understand into words. We need to take that idea or that feeling which we have within us in a more spiritual way and put it down onto a piece of paper, which doesn't necessarily need to be understood by everyone, and people don't necessarily understand it and receive it exactly the way we experience it. This is a bit of a better example of how the spiritual cosmos operates. You see, when we see a person in need and we decide to go and give that person some charity with our physical money, with our physical hands, into their physical possession, within that is a feeling within us, a desire to help another person as a person. And within that desire is the fact that we understand that we need to help other people because that's what's right and what's nice. And within that understanding is the infinite and pure desire of the soul to do what is right. So in a similar way, in our physical world, we have this physical world filled with tables, trees, stones, and everything we can imagine. And within it, there's an infinite and spiritual, godly energy, which we obviously cannot see. And within that godly energy, there's an even deeper and more spiritual and powerful godly energy. And within that, there's an even more unified godly energy, which is one with God. All right, so we've made it to the end of this video describing the 4 realms. Now, obviously, there are many questions which are still open, so therefore we have more videos coming up on these 4 realms, specifically this one, which you can check out, and I would strongly suggest. And thank you so much for joining us, and I really hope you subscribe and stay along for more of our upcoming Kabbalistic and mystical videos.